Over the last 11 years since I set the Cannonball record in 2013 in my 2004 Mercedes CL55 AMG, I have driven the car maybe 14 or 15,000 miles. It's got about 145,000 miles on it now. And for the first couple of years, that was still in daily driver duty. It was my primary car alongside a Mercy Roadster. But most of the time since then, it's lived at the Miles Through Time Museum in North Georgia, right next to the 2002 S55 AMG that I won the 2904 with in 2014, at the time setting the competitive event Cannonball record. So I love both cars. I don't really see myself selling them. I like having them around. I don't need them very often, but generally when I get them out, it is to take them to some kind of Cannonball related event. Last year we drove both cars up to New York for a get together with the Cannonball guys. This summer I took the CL to the Smith Heritage Invitational in Charlotte, a really cool event that Ray Evernham and a lot of guys up there put together. I love that one each year. And there was an opportunity just recently to take the car up to Doug Tabbitt's house and to Minerva, Ohio in the Cleveland area. And the idea there was that there was an event called The Cars Are the Stars, where they kind of take a movie premise and then blow it up into a large car show. And Doug had partnered with the organizer to put together a display of essentially the entire heritage or lineage of the Cannonball record, all the way back to and before the days of Irwin Cannonball Baker. And so he was going to have one of Alex Roy's M5s there, obviously the E63 and the S6 from Doug and Arnie's records, a 550 to represent Rawlings run, and he wanted to have the CL55 there, and I was excited for the chance to take it up there. Now the car always requires many things. Most of the time it's actually sitting on top of some 4x4 pieces of wood that I've cut to right at 7 inches, which is exactly where they need to be at the jack points to make the car look like its active body control suspension is not leaking. But the car, I kick a lot of cans down the road, as I do with most of my cars, which we're learning right now with Cameron Davis and DC Motorworks on the Murciélagos. But he takes good care of the car, checks it over as I'd like to think is needed, but generally the car behaves itself when I need it to go somewhere. When I drove it to Charlotte this summer, it did not give me any issues. So apart from checking the fluids, checking the tires, I figured there wasn't all that much that I needed to do. Foreshadowing, there were some things that I needed to do. So my plan was, right before the weekend, to drive up to Ohio. It's a 10 or so hour drive, not too bad. And of course, this is the perfect road trip car. The car is outfitted exactly as it was. The fuel tanks are not plumbed in, but they still sit in the trunk to show off exactly how we did it. All the period correct electronics are there. Both radar detectors that false positive constantly. But the plan was a nice leisurely drive up Friday, the show on Saturday, come back Sunday. And so Cameron was actually going to come with me over the last couple of years. He's gotten extremely involved in the Cannonball community. He has won the US Express as well as the Southern Classic. So the Southern Classic is like the Bandit Run, the US Express being the continuation event of the Cannonball in the early 80s. And so he won that event in the fall when we drove the Rolls Royce dressed as Sheiks. And so he did that in a 450 SEL 6.9 that he was also going to take up for the show. Now, I am no warranty, I am certainly no roadside assistance, but having Cameron along was going to be a nice little insurance policy that ended up being necessary very quickly. Now, his co-driver Aaron was a little later getting to where we were going to rendezvous to leave, so I left not going all that fast to get a little bit ahead, and that became quite handy because about 45 minutes out of Atlanta, I started to get an error for battery voltage. Now, I keep a splitter plugged into one of the 12-volt outlets so I can see what the battery's putting out because there's not one in the gauge cluster for the CL55. It dropped from 14 to 13 to 12 and then down to about 11.6 rather quickly with a bright red error. And as I turned to pull off at the next exit, I realized that I also did not have power steering. And so the logic there is my accessory hose has gone bad. Now, I didn't know if it had just popped off, might be able to go back on, so I kind of got into a safe parking area, opened the hood, and realized that it had shredded itself into a million pieces. And in doing so, or the precipitating factor perhaps, there is a pulley that is both aluminum and plastic, and the plastic part had been destroyed. So this was going to be a very challenging situation, but fortunately I was able to make a quick call to Cameron, who was about 30 to 45 minutes behind me. He was also nearly to his primary part source for Mercedes OEM stuff. And so he said, look, I can call it in, pick it up at will call. I'll be there in 45 minutes with everything we need to do all the pulleys and the belts on your car. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. This would have been a tow-worthy offense in most cases. And so he and Aaron showed up exactly. I carry my Cannonball toolbox, but I didn't realize that I didn't have exactly the right Torx bits and things necessary to remove all the things that I would need to. And so fortunately, Cameron and more so Aaron had all their tools in the 450 SEL 6.9, and they were able in about an hour to get everything done, even more than I probably had to have to get back on the road so that we wouldn't have to redo the rest when we got home. But we get the car back on the road, it runs flawlessly for a good little while. Later in the drive, we started to see some peculiar electronic issues. Of course, there's wires running everywhere, done well by my friends here at Cartoons, but more than a decade later, we started to see some strange interference signs with the radio. And of course, the radio wasn't on, that's not how I drive, but with everything going on, we started to get some weird feedback loops. A key reset did solve that problem, but throughout the rest of the drive, it did make some weird noises, but the belt stayed on, the power steering stayed on, and the car made it to, and eventually back home from Ohio. But Doug and the team there had put on an incredible event. Just seeing all the cars together was super duper cool. We had never gotten a picture of Alex's M5, even though this was 144B, the book tour car. It looks exactly like the real one. Of course, my car and the Audi and the Mercedes E63. So having all those cars right there was ultra cool. Being able to take a picture of me and Dave Black, my co-driver, alongside Arnie, Doug, Dave Maher, and Alex Roy. Really special. We signed some autographs, spoke on a panel, even alongside Pam Yates, who was there. Now, the other big event that Doug had helped to put on was an auction and a dinner later that night to support Pam and to support the charities that are near and dear to Cannonball, including the Brock Yates Memorial Fund with the Alzheimer's Association that we raise money for each year. And so in the prior couple of weeks, Ben, Charlie Safari Wilson, the organizer of the C2C Express, and Christopher Michaels had been helping Pam Yates and her daughter to go through all the stuff that Brock had just stuffed everywhere in the attic and the basement and see what might be good to sell to this community of Cannonball enthusiasts as an auction. So after an amazing car show and just a lot of fun just hanging out with these people that share this ridiculous obsession that we have, the crazy people that enrich our lives in Cannonball, we went over to Doug's house for the auction. Now, it was a little bit chaotic, but between Fakara, myself, and Ben feeding information to Christopher, who could kind of be the master of ceremonies and auctioneer, we were able to sell hundreds of items in lots to the people like myself that really can just treasure it. So that's actually how I had gotten Brock's Cannonball jacket from the 70s and the one that he wore in the movies. She sold a few things off amongst the community just via the Facebook group earlier last year. And so it's been really fun to see what she digs up, the stories that she can tell behind them and things like that. So through the auction, we raised some great money and we got to uncover some amazing artifacts of Cannonball. So I already had what I feel like is the ultimate souvenir of Cannonball, but I think I got the next best thing. Brock's briefcase. I don't know exactly when he carried it, but it's got his name tag from Scandinavian Airlines. It's got a Brock Yates Cannonball Run sticker, his CBS sticker, a Stunts Unlimited Hal Needham sticker, and inside it's got his Nikon camera that he used to shoot a lot of the photos that went alongside his car and driver articles and for everywhere that he wrote and the books that he wrote. So I just thought that was the perfect extra thing to have to occasionally carry around and otherwise to live back here. It was just a great time, some awesome food, and just the chance to swap stories and do the things that we just love to celebrate about this thing that brings us together. And so a great time was had by all, and it was time to head back south in the CL. And fortunately, I was worried about it, but it did make it. The idea of caring for a now 20-year-old aging, high-tech, high-speed German car is daunting, but I can't fathom the idea of letting it go. Alex did mention that he's kicked around the idea of selling his M5 because it hasn't been driven in, I don't know, at least 5-6 years. If I ever did sell it, I'd look back and realize that was quite some mistake. And so I think that one is here to stay. I say that about a lot of cars, and a lot of them have been around here for long, but I've never owned a car longer than that, going on 12 years now since I bought the CL. So soon it'll be headed back to either Savoy or to Miles Through Time. We're talking to both about different Cannonball displays, but ultimately I think it will live most of the rest of its life at the Miles Through Time Museum and other places like that. But I'm glad to know that with maybe a little bit more planning and a little bit more wrench turning before we head out, the car is still ready to go and ready to show up for people to look at the interior and see the scanner and the traffic light changer and the CB radio and all the old nav screens and the radar detectors and all this stuff, along with the fuel tanks that make it such a special car, that represents such a special experience, and now represents so many friendships and such a community that's been forged since then. And so with this being really the kind of thing that Doug wants to add to the Cannonball community, the chance to really see this zoomed out picture of everything that's gone into the pursuit of the record for well over 100 years as we continue to add more and more times, now over 300, almost 400 times to the Cannonball leaderboard that we keep as a spreadsheet. I love everything that the Cannonball world continues to become. Successful car purchasing is all about knowing your buying power and being able to move quickly. And the best way to do that is getting pre-qualified with Premier Financial Services. Call one of these numbers, speak to one of their representatives, fill out their application, and then you'll know exactly how much car you can buy. You'll approach a seller, tell them you're already qualified, you've got your simple lease set up from Premier Financial, and you'll be able to close very, very quickly. That's why Premier is one of the most powerful partners in the world of exotic car financing, and that's why I turn to them every time I go out and try to buy something crazy.